Learn English through Stories C38 PDF. Adopted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Content 1. Mini Stories 2. Picture dictionary page. 1. Mini Stories 2. By Emma Hill. Story 6. When Polly left school, she had no idea what she wanted to do. A friend of hers who was a year older and whose name was Josephine was at art college, and she persuaded Polly to join her there. Polly's father worked in a factory and her mother worked in a shop. They were saving their money to buy their own house, and they had hoped that Polly would start earning too as soon as she left school, so when she told them that she wanted to go to art college, she expected them to have objections. But in fact they had none. "You'll have to find some kind of a job to pay for your college," Ollie's mother warned her. "Your father and I will be very happy to keep you at home, but we have no money for your college course and none for paints and all the other things you'll need." "Thank you very much," Polly answered. "I'm really very grateful to you both, and there's no problem about getting a job. The head of the art college has offered me one in their library." After a few months, Polly's parents really felt very proud that their daughter was going to college, especially when she brought home some of the things she had painted, for which she had received high praise from her teachers. Polly sometimes went to museums to see paintings by famous artists, and one day she said to her parents, "Why don't you come to a museum with me one day? Then I can tell you all about the paintings, and you can see the kinds of things I'm trying to do myself." Polly's mother was free on Thursday afternoons and on Saturdays, but her father sometimes had to work on those days. They waited until one Saturday when he didn't have to work, and then they all went off to the museum that Polly had chosen. She showed her parents some famous paintings, and then they came to one that they recognized. "This," Polly said, pointing to it, "is Van Gogh's Sunflowers." "What cheek," her father answered. "He's copied the picture we've had in our hall for the last 10 years. Story 7. Helen was a student at a university. She was studying English. She was a clever girl, and she was also very good at sports and games. Her best sport was throwing the javelin, and she always won a prize for that at university games. Helen's best friend was called Mary. She went to the same classes as Helen, and she was a very good runner. The two girls often went out together in the evenings. One evening they went to practice their sports in the university grounds, and when they had finished, they walked part of the way home together, but at one corner they had to say goodbye, because their homes were in different directions. "Be careful on your way home," Mary said to Helen. "I would be happier if our houses were nearer." "Me too," answered Helen. The streets were very quiet at that time of the evening. The next morning Helen and Mary met at an English class, and Helen said to Mary, "Do you know what happened to me after I left you yesterday evening?" "No," answered Mary anxiously. "What happened to you?" "Well," Helen said, "while I was walking home along that quiet street near my house, a thief came up behind me and pulled my necklace off my neck and ran away with it." "I wish I'd been there," Mary said angrily. "If I had been, I'd have run after the man and I'd probably have caught him, but what are you going to do now? Have you been to the police?" "No," Helen answered with a smile. "Why not?" Mary asked in surprise. "Because," Helen answered, "when the man pulled my necklace, I turned round suddenly and put my hand out to try to stop him. I caught a chain which he was wearing round his neck and pulled it off him. My necklace was a cheap one which was not real silver, but this chain is made of real gold. If I went to the police, I might have to give it to them." Story 8. Once upon a time, a boy who was called Stephen lived in a small town which was a long distance from the sea. Stephen read a lot of books about ships and their voyages to distant countries, and he always imagined himself in each of them. When he was 16, he decided that he wanted to become an officer in the merchant navy, so he went to a place which trained young men for these jobs. Stephen enjoyed the lessons very much, especially the ones on a ship, and he was also glad to do a lot of sports and exercises because he had always been very fit and by far the best in his school at such things. Then one day, one of the teachers informed the new students that it was time for them to begin having swimming and diving lessons. Stephen arrived at the pool the next morning with the other students. He was looking forward to learning to swim. The teacher arrived a minute later and commanded those who could not swim to go into one group, those who could swim but not dive properly to go into a second group, and those who could both swim and dive well to go into a third one. Stephen went into the second group. The teacher then told the students in the second group to go down the steps into the swimming pool one by one and swim to the other end. The first two obeyed, and neither of them had any trouble in swimming to the other end. Stephen was the third in the line. He climbed down the steps, but as soon as he began to swim, he sank under the water. When he did not come up again, the alarmed teacher jumped in and dragged him out while the other students cheered. Then the teacher said to Stephen, "Why ever didn't you join the group that can't swim?" "Because I'd never even bathed in a pool before," Stephen answered, "so I didn't know whether I could swim or not." Story 9. Mrs. Peters had learned to play the piano when she was at school, but when she had begun to work, she had lived in a very small flat, and there had been no room for a piano. She was sad about this, but there was nothing she could do about it, however much she tried. Then, when she was 23, she married, and she and her husband went to live in a bigger flat. "I'm going to buy myself a nice little piano now," Mrs. Peters said to her husband, "and I'm going to begin to practice again." Her husband was happy because he liked listening to the piano. So Mrs. Peters saved some money, and her husband helped her, and her parents gave her a generous amount of money for her birthday and told her to buy whatever she wanted with it, so she soon had enough for a small piano. She went to a shop in her town and said, "I'll choose whichever piano does not cost too much and fits into my living room." She did this, and when she had paid for the piano and given the shop assistant her address, he asked her whether she would like him to get it tuned every few months. Mrs. Peters said that she would, so a few months later she heard from the shop that a man was coming to tune the piano at 9:45 that morning. Now, Mrs. Peters had not cleaned the house yet, so it was fairly dusty and untidy, and there was cigarette ash on the carpet. Mrs. Peters hated having even the least amount of dirt and felt ashamed whenever strange people saw her house like that, so she had to hurry to clean everything carefully. It meant a lot of effort, and it made her hot and tired, but anyhow by the time the man arrived to tune the piano at exactly 9:45, everything was finished. Mrs. Peters opened the door and the man was standing there with a big dog. "Good morning," the man said as he took his cap off politely. "Will it disturb you if I bring my dog in, please? I'm blind, and he leads me wherever I go." Story 10. Sam was an old farmer. He was born on his farm and had lived on it all his life. He had married his neighbor's daughter, and they grew fruit and vegetables. Sam got up at 5 o'clock every morning to gather them and take a load off to market in his old truck. There were very few vehicles on the country roads at that time of the morning, and Sam knew how to get to market very well, so as he was going along, he was always thinking about everything except his driving. One morning he was thinking about what crops to plant for the next year's harvest, and whether to try something else. A lot of other farmers were planting the same things which he produced, so the prices in the market were coming down and he was getting less money. After a few kilometers, Sam came to a place where the small road which went in the direction of the market crossed a bigger one, and he continued over it without stopping. He always crossed the big road like that because there was never any traffic on it at that time of the morning, so there was no fear of having an accident, and anyway he was always in a hurry because he wanted to get to the market in time for its opening. But this morning, a young policeman whom he had never seen before signaled to him to stop 100 meters beyond the crossroads. Sam stopped beside the policeman, and the policeman said to him, "Didn't you know that there was a sign telling you to stop at the crossroads before going over the main road?" "Oh yes," answered Sam. "I knew that there was a sign at that point, because I go to market along this road every morning, but what I unfortunately didn't know was that you were here." 2. Picture dictionary page.